Hello, Jacksonites! Debuting a new pair of shades that I just got today. I really like how these look. And debuting a brand new series on my channel, getting into a franchise that I've wanted to talk about for a very, very, very long time. Today, on the debut episode of what I'm calling Super Ultra Binge, I couldn't really think of anything else, but I actually do think Super Ultra Binge has a nice uh ring to it, like Super Kaiju Binge, but because this is the Ultra series, why not just call it the Super Ultra Binge? Today I will be discussing the original the very first installment of one of my all-time favorite franchises. The 1966 classic series Ultra Q. Indeed. But sadly, they kind of start the series on a rough go. Great. Ultra Q, of course, came being the very first installment of the Ultra series, was broadcast on Tokyo Broadcasting System, TBS, from July 2nd to July 3rd, or January 2nd to July 3rd from 1966, with a grand total of 28 episodes. This series was followed 2 weeks later by the more popular Ultraman also in 1966. Of course, being the second of the Ultra series. More on that tomorrow. Ultra Q is a tokusatsu science fiction kaiju series made in the style of many of Toho's tokusatsu sci-fi horror films. Produced in black and white by Tsuburaya Productions, this is the first of the long-running Ultra series, and it can be described as a half-hour Toho kaiju series. Executive producer Eiji Tsuburaya intended this series to be more like the American television series The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits. It definitely shows, featuring a variety of strange and unusual stories. This series very much is like a anthology show, very similar to The Twilight Zone. Matter of fact, if you were to watch a few episodes of The Twilight Zone and then you would watch Ultra Q, you'd swear this is essentially a Japanese version of The Twilight Zone. Which is both good and bad. I'm not a big fan of The Twilight Zone, but I respect it in how unique of a show it is and how ahead of its time it really is. But after a survey, TBS Network convinced Tsuburaya Productions to add more giant monsters into this show, as the first kaiju boom took off after Ultra Q became an enormous hit. Since Godzilla and Gamera were, of course, all the rage at the time. And much like The X-Files, the series features continuing characters who investigate strange supernatural phenomena, including giant monsters, aliens, ghosts, and various other threats. The original planned title of this project was called Unbalance, and it was subsequently renamed Ultra Q, mostly due to the word ultra gaining popularity due to the Japanese gymnast gold medal recipient in the 1964 Summer Olympics using a technique named Ultra C. The Q standing for question, and is also tied with another TBS hit series, Obaki no Q Taro, an animated series based on the manga by Fujiko Fujio. The series began production in 1964 with the premiere set for January of 1966. And at the time, Ultra Q was the most expensive television series ever produced in Japan. The There's not a whole lot to say for me in terms of personal history with Ultra Q. So, as an Ultraman fan, it's pretty difficult. Well, no, it is easy to separate Ultraman from Ultra Q, but at the same time, it's kind of difficult because this series really is where everything started. There's a lot of monsters in this show that will either be retooled or reused in later Ultraman installments. But the general tone, atmosphere, and style of this show would very much be carried on into future installments of the Ultraman franchise. And this show, in and of itself, would spawn its own separate legacy from Ultraman, aside from using its monsters. This show would get a live action film called Ultra Q the Movie Legend of the Stars, which hang on, let's see if I can find some. Um, oh, here it is. Oh, Ultra Q Dark Fantasy is a remake of this show. The final episode. No, hold on. Oh, no, there it is. Ultra Q the Movie Legend of the Stars, released in 1990. Okay, new series in 2004 would be released called Ultra Q Dark Fantasy, that being a remake of this show. The final episode confirms that Ultra Q is in an alternate timeline. And then there's another series called Neo Ultra Q, which I also do have. Probably will be, I will be including that in this series way later down the line. That is a sequel to this original series. So yeah, there's four total installments in the Ultra Q subseries. This, Ultra Q the Movie, Ultra Q Dark Fantasy, and Neo Ultra Q. There's also a little bit of like kind of like a spin-off, an unofficial spin-off. The original concept of the show, when it was going to be called Unbalanced, was ultimately used for a 13 episode horror anthology series titled Horror Theater Unbalance that was produced by Subaraya Productions in 1973. I've never seen that. I want to see if maybe it could possibly be on DVD. But that pretty much takes the concept of this show and expands it into something like American Horror Story. It's a 13 episode, 1 hour long each horror anthology series. And again, like with the Twilight Zone 2, Ultra Q is very much like an anthology series. It's not completely like an anthology series like the Twilight Zone, where every single episode is a completely different setting, completely different cast of characters, and a completely different story. There's a lot of episodes that feel different from each other, but the three main characters throughout the show do recur throughout the show and appear in every episode. So that it's not quite like an anthology series, but there's a lot of elements that make this feel like an anthology show, like the Twilight Zone. So as far as that goes, so personal history. So I was never really interested in, not to sound like a purist, but it's kind of the same attitude with Godzilla fans talking about the Godzilla franchise. It's hard to separate the fact that even though there's three movies where Godzilla is by himself, Godzilla fighting another monster is just so interwovenly tied into Godzilla as a pop culture icon. It's hard to separate that from Godzilla being a solo monster and then having Godzilla fight others. Similar with various installments of the Ultra series, every other installment has a different Ultraman. But then I would research Ultra Q, and just nothing about this seemed all that interesting to me. So I never really was all that into checking this series out, but not until this would not be the first release, because in, I think, 2013, Shout Factory released the original Ultra Q on DVD not long after Shout Factory released the original Ultra 7. But when Mill Creek started putting these out, of course, because I wanted to get every single one of these, because I felt like, oh, damn, Mill Creek's putting out all these shows. I best get on these, even the ones that I'm not interested in, because what if these go out of print? Because that's sadly a big fear as a kaiju fan. It's when, even if it's a movie that you're not or a show that you're not a big fan of, you best get your hands on it, because there might be a time in the future where you do want to get your hands on it and it's out of print and pricey. So I slurped this up along with a couple other shows. So I was like, okay, it's a bundle deal. Plus, I'd watched a couple episodes of this prior. I did not watch this series for the very first time when I got this set. I finished it with this set, but I didn't start it here. I actually started watching it last year, beginning of last year, actually, on Tubi, the same service where I watch Kamen Rider. I started the first 6 or 7 episodes watching it on Tubi, and I was pretty disappointed. Hey, Horror and Metal is here. Yo. But yeah, I was pretty disappointed, honestly. I was going into this show thinking, well, I know I'm not super interested in this, but it is, I could just kind of think of it as like a classic Godzilla series, so I'll give it a chance. I didn't dig it. 6, 7 episodes in. Well, Horror and Metal, like I said, it's on Tubi. All 28 episodes are on Tubi, so if you want to check it out there, you can give it a try, though my review might kind of scare you off. So I just kind of left it alone. But then I got this set, so I was like, fuck, now I have to watch it. And again, completionism in me. I was just like, damn it. I don't want to watch this show. But I did. So I mentioned last year, when after my son was born, when I came back to YouTube after 6 weeks, that this was one of the shows that I had watched during that 6 weeks. It was rough. Very, very, very rough. And I think I remember mentioning that this was the worst movie or show that I had watched during that stretch of time. Yeah, it was. I'm going to level with you guys. It kind of sucks that I'm starting a new series, and the first one that I reviewed, Kaiju Network, you watched, I think, 3 episodes of Ultra Q, and I remember I recommended the original Ultraman to you, Kaiju Network. But yeah, it kind of sucks that I'm starting a new review series with a show that I don't really like. Fucking sucks. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of this show. It's not a good start to a great franchise, unfortunately. I know this show has its fans. Mostly from what I've seen, fans of the Twilight Zone tend to gravitate to this show as well. That sucks for me because, like I said, I'm not a big fan of the Twilight Zone. So I'm kind of going into this show at a disadvantage. I tried to go into this as an Ultra fan, and I still wasn't satisfied. So it's a weird, this show is in a weird gray area, unfortunately. And I'm just not a big fan. So That really talking about the plot, it's kind of hard to. This could probably like with all my TV show reviews. This will probably be the longest section talking about the episodes for their plots. The plot of this show generally is fairly simple. It's like a hybrid of the X-Files and the Twilight Zone. Each episode, the three main characters will investigate some kind of occurrence that's happening that deals with the paranormal or some kind of monster that's attacking. Um, and each episode is a different situation. Sometimes they can be very trippy, and sometimes they can be pretty straightforward. That's when the show is more watchable, when it's more straightforward. But when it gets super trippy and experimental and metaphysical at times, like the final episode, the show is damn near what's the incomprehensible, to quote Trev for Predator 2018. Thankfully, now on Wikipedia or even Ultra Wiki, there's no sadly, there's no plot summaries. But on these Mill Creek sets, which are these are very even on this is a very nice set. They have a Blu-ray steelbook of this as well, but I just decided to get the less expensive standard Blu-ray set. It's a nice set. Here's the front, here's the back, and on this from Ultra Q all the way up to Ultraman Leo, there's like a spined picture that if you put all of them together creates one big giant picture. Whenever I get around to Ultraman Leo, I might put them all together and show you what it looks like. And this was kind of a hint because this was one of the first that they put out for the Showa series. Probably was the first. If you look closely, right there, there's Ultraman's hand. So I'll show you that tomorrow. So that was kind of a clue of more to come later in this series. But thankfully, they were nice enough to remaster the Blu-ray transfers. But they also gave us this nice booklet here. And this is one of the monsters that appears in the show. And in this booklet, we have episode summaries. So I'll try to get through this as quick as I can. But I'm going to read off the plots to every episode that we have here. Oh, wait, no. Before we begin, a word from our sponsor. That's good. Oh, another thing real quick, too. The show was executively produced by Eiji Tsuburaya, the special effects guy from Toho. But a lot of episodes in this show were directed by one of his sons, Hajime Tsuburaya. Not all of them, but a fair few. The first three were directed by Hajime Tsuburaya. Episode 1, Defeat Gomez. Near Mount Konpo, tunnel excavation work on the third sector of the new Tokai Super Expressway project unearths a huge cavern from which a large, strange stone is recovered. One worker claims to have seen a huge monster in the darkness, leading a young scholar to recall an ancient text kept in a local shrine. The legend tells of Gomez, a tusked bipedal beast with fearsome claws, and a phoenix-like bird, Litra, which defends the order of nature against the other. That sounds vaguely familiar. When Yuriko and June become trapped in the caverns, they discover that this legend is not mythical when a rhythmic beating emanates from the strange stone, revealing Gomez. Actually, I don't think I have enough time to get through all of these. These are pretty detailed. I'll talk about select episodes. So, That's the first episode. Then I'll talk about episode 4, Mammoth Flower. Enormous thorny tendrils break through streets of Tokyo's business district, while others break through sub-basements to feed off those caught in their grasp. The plant pushes up into the offices of the Mainichi Shimpo News and eventually through the roof, where its poisonous flower blooms. It sounds also very familiar. Professor Ichino Tani hypothesizes this primordial plant, Jiran, has revived due to man-made changes to the environment, but argues with Professor Genda. Ichino Tani wants to destroy the monster while his colleagues wants to study it. Episode 5, Pagila is here. Jun travels by ship to investigate the mysterious disappearance of his old chum, Nomura, a member of the Japanese Antarctic Winter Party. Nomura's cryptic last message, Pagila is here, has beckoned Jun to Antarctica. Team leader Amanda and Jun eventually find the body of Nomura under a sheet of ice guarded by his faithful dog. Saburo, who survived by eating native moss. The team discovers that the moss Saburo subsisted on is enriched with pegumin H, a substance that is poisonous to Paglia. As the monster approaches their outpost, a rocket is loaded with the pegumin H and is used to drive back the monster, though it flees to fight another day. Anthony Sarkis here is saying my favorite episode is probably the Baron Spider episode. That's episode 9. Jun, Ippei, Yuriko, and their friends become lost in a thick fog driving back from a party near the coast. In need of shelter for the night, they stumble across an abandoned mansion standing in the middle of the swamplands. This reminds Jun of an old story concerning a baron obsessed with spiders who went mad when his betrothed daughter went missing in the swamp after being bitten by a poisonous tarantula. According to legend, she and her father were transformed into giant arachnids. Legend, the truth, as the group learns when a pair of massive spiders attack them. Episode 13, Garadama. A schoolboy, Mamoru, witnesses and retrieves a small, lightweight meteorite which coincides with another falling into the Libyan desert. When they begin to emit signals into space, Professor Ichino Tani decides to investigate the object that fell in Japan, which the locals have nicknamed Garadama. While searching the area, yet another giant meteorite crashes into the dam reservoir, sending boats scattering while the tremendous heat evaporates the entire lake. Not long afterwards, a strange monster breaks out of the meteorite as Jun and Ippei set out to rescue two girls trapped in a boat stranded high on a precipice. This here being Garadama. Episode 14, Tokyo Ice Age. On a beautiful summer day, a plane landing at Haneda Airport suddenly freezes in the air and drops onto the tarmac. As emergency vehicles respond, the airport begins to freeze over. Jun postulates that Paglia may be migrating to the North Pole, and suddenly the monster lands in the middle of the city and begins to turn the metropolis into a frozen wasteland. Episode 16, Garamond Strikes Back. One night, a strange man dressed in black steals the sample of tilsonite stored in the vaults of the Astrophysics Research Center. Professor Ichinotani alerts Yuriko, Jun, and Ippei of the theft and that the electronic brain has started transmitting radio waves into space. Scientists detect a cluster of Garadamas heading to Earth with Tokyo as their target. Episode 18, The Rainbow's Egg. Strange weather patterns and a golden rainbow occur after a white bamboo flower blossoms. Some say that when the flower is brought together with the legendary rainbow's egg, wishes will be fulfilled. Not far from the construction site of an ultra-modern industrial city built around a new atomic power plant, the monster Pagos emerges from beneath the earth and attacks a truck carrying a spherical uranium capsule. Jun, Yuriko, and Ippei come to investigate the disaster and meet a group of children who are chasing the rainbow to find the legendary egg in the hopes to help a beloved matriarch to walk again. Um, let's see. Episode 23, Fury of the South Sea. 5 ship disasters occur near Micronesia in the waters known as the Sea of Death by locals. The crew of the Japanese fishing vessel perish when a gigantic octopus sends it to the bottom. After contacting NATO for an airstrike against Sudar, the name of the monster, Jun and Ippei discover that Minami, Yuzo, and Anita are to be executed for their blasphemy against the monster. They are saved by the timely aerial bombing of the beast's lair. Coming ashore, the mortally wounded cephalopod attacks the village. And then finally, the final episode, episode 28, also directed by Hajime Tsuburaya, called Open Up. During a night drive, Yuriko imagines running off with June to a world where they can be alone, but this is cut short when June spots a man lying across the road. While on their way to Professor Ichinotani, the man suddenly starts crying out, pleading to be let aboard a surreal train, where Kenji Tomino, a science fiction author from whom his strange train runs, explains that the train travels beyond space and time for those seeking to escape to another dimension without responsibilities and abandon their past. That's an example of the really bad, surreal, experimental, metaphysical shit that this show delves into all the time. And it's just confusing and incomprehensible. So that's the general tone. I didn't list off every episode only just because I don't have enough time. It'll take just way too long. But that is the general tone. It can kind of switch off and on from either having a giant monster, some kind of paranormal entity, bad experimental metaphysical shit, or some kind of human-sized monster that people have to contend with. It can be very pretty variable. So that's good. There's lots of variety, but sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Excuse me. That's good. So, despite me not being a big fan of this show, I have 5 pros for the original Ultra Q. Oh, hold on. The first pro is kind of 2 rolled into 1. The creepy atmosphere and the black and white. I like the fact that this show was shot in black and white. I don't think, because this was the most expensive show ever made at the time, I don't believe the black and white was done for budgetary reasons like the original Gamera. I do think, because this was only 1 year after, well, no, it was being worked on before the original Gamera, but I do think it was a choice for Eiji Tsuburaya to shoot this in black and white because he wanted this to look like The Outer Limits and especially The Twilight Zone. The black and white does help with the creepy atmosphere that this show has all throughout. Even during giant monster episodes, there's a lot of times when the tone and the atmosphere and the look and feel just feels very claustrophobic, creepy, and unsettling. It feels very much like prototypical J horror stuff, just with giant monsters in it. And I think it's really well pulled off, and the black and white helps to accentuate that creepy tone. By the way, this might not be a super long episode because I just ultimately don't have that much to say positive about this show. But just ultimately, I don't have a lot of feelings attached to this show other than not a big fan. But still, bear with me. Pro number 2 is I like the musical score. Who did the music for it? Crap, doesn't say. Not even the Wikipedia page says. I don't know who did the music, sadly. But whoever did it, I like it. It's not super great, but it does feel like this is a horror sci-fi anthology series. So the music is very well done in conveying this being a horror show or a sci-fi show or a kaiju show. There's times where it does feel very similar to not Akira Fukube. It sounds more Masaru Sato-esque. That kind of, it's a bit jazzy, but it's a bit creepy and but also funky and spooky at the same time. Like the opening theme, it's simple, but it's also very catchy and creepy. Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. Yeah, I like the music. It's not bad. It certainly helps the show when it's trying to be decent. Pro number 3, these all kind of have to do with each other. Pro number 3 is all the Showa Godzilla connections. Ultraman has this too. I'll talk about this tomorrow as well. But this show has a lot of connective tissue, as I've said about the Showa Ultraman series, to Godzilla. Hell, this show was created by the guy who did the effects for the original Godzilla series, Eiji Tsuburaya. So it only makes sense, especially since Toho were the investors, and they're also on the board of directors at Tsuburaya Productions. There is a lot of reused props, reused monsters, and reused actors from the Toho kaiju and sci-fi stuff used in this show. For example, going to the characters, Jun Manjomi is played by Kenji Sahara. Of course, being in a lot of Godzilla movies. Akira Kubo also, I think, is in a couple episodes of this. Susumu Kurobe is also in a couple episodes of this. He would be in Ultraman. More on that tomorrow. And the guy who plays Kumayama from Mothra vs. Godzilla also plays an important... He plays Yuriko, who's the reporter character in this show. He plays... here we are. News desk editor Seki played by Yoshifumi Tajima, Yuriko's boss and editor at the Daily News. He plays that guy. He's a lot more likable in this show than he is in. Anthony Sarkis here is saying the music was done by Kunio Mayuchi, who did the music score for the original Ultraman and Godzilla's Revenge. Okay, cool. Okay, so Kunio did a good job on the music for this show. But yeah, there's a lot of connective tissue. They reuse some actors, but mostly they reuse a lot of monster props. So Eiji Tsuburaya was ordered by his crew to take what they needed from the prop warehouse for use on this series. The large manta prop was used for the dragon Karyu, while the head was used as the front portion of a Viking ship seen in episode 12. The giant octopus prop from Frankenstein vs. Baragon became Sudar. The Maguma suit from Gorath was repurposed as Todora. And the Godzilla suit was reused for Gomez, heavily disguised, but you can still clearly tell it's Godzilla. The King Kong suit was remodified for the monster Goro, given a different face and a tail. Baragon suit was reused for the Pagos monster, and a small mechanical Rodan prop was stripped down and rebuilt as the bird monsters Litra and Largius, respectively. So, and the various episode plots, especially whenever there's a monster on the loose, it feels like a super condensed version of a Toho monster movie. Just condensed from 90 minutes to 24 minutes. For better and for worse. But when the kaiju vibe is on very strong, this feels straight up like you're just watching a super condensed Toho movie. Especially with they use a lot of sound effects too from the Toho movies as well. Explosions, monster roars, laser effects, space effects. They reuse a lot of stuff from Toho for this show, and it doesn't feel like this show is just stealing from others to call it its own. This really makes Ultra Q feel like, in a good way, an unofficial spin-off to the Godzilla series. More for stuff like non-Godzilla stuff, like Frankenstein versus Baragon, Gorath, Dogora, Battle in Outer Space, and the Mysterians. But still, the Showa Godzilla connections are very prevalent and front and center, but it just makes you feel very comfortable when you're watching this. It doesn't feel too unfamiliar. It feels very familiar. It feels like you're just watching more of Godzilla stuff in black and white from the 60s with different monsters. It's great. Pro number 4, speaking of which, there's some cool monsters here. Going back to this book, not every episode has a monster, but the ones that do, showcased in this booklet, Coin Monster, which is stupid. I don't much care for this one. This is a Kaijin, a human-sized monster. Meteorite Monster Garamon. Ancient Monster Gomez. Primordial Bird Litra. Colossal Simian Goro. Ancient Monstrous Bird Larugius. Abduction Phantom Kimur. Primordial Amphibian Ragon, essentially Tsuburaya's take on Creature from the Black Lagoon. Space Ray Boss Tang, which is essentially a giant stingray. Colossal Man, Giant Octopus Sudar. Oh, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, that's about it. That's all the monsters. Some of them are cool. Oh no, there's Pagos too. So this isn't even complete. The fuck? So for this, I'll actually go to Ultra Q on Ultraman Wiki. I kind of figured that. Unsurprisingly, Haruo Nakajima was the suit actor for Gomez and Pagos. Anthony, was he the suit actor for any others, or was he just for those two? But that doesn't surprise me that Haruo Nakajima worked on the show. I know he worked on 10 episodes of the original Ultraman as well. We also have Balloonga, Gorgos, Data Man, Pagos, Keemer, Ragon, um, the Giant, Sudar, Peter, which is a monster, human-sized monster, and Todola. So there's some cool designs. The most notable, in my opinion, is in my the most notable being Litra, Gomez, Pagos. Okay, it was just those two that Hiro Nakajima played. And Garamond too. Garamond, because this guy would be later repurposed into the character of Pigmon in the Ultraman franchise, as a good guy. Because in this, somehow this thing is a giant robot. Whatever. Whereas in Ultraman, this guy would be turned into just a living, breathing monster. But the most notable, in my opinion, is Litra, Gomez, Garadama, Goro, and Pagos, because they're all reused Ultraman, or not Ultraman, reused Godzilla suits. And Pagila too. He would be reused in Ultraman as well. I guess this is the closest. Right there. This guy here. That's Gomez. You can clearly tell that's Godzilla disguised as another monster. Oh, and here's Goro, the giant simian. It's the King Kong versus Godzilla suit. Um, so yeah. But there's some cool monsters showcased here. So this will lead me into, none of them are all that super special. At best, they're just kind of rampaging giant monsters that are come right out of a Toho monster movie, but they're still cool. But this will lead me into pro number 5 is the special effects. This is probably the best thing about this show. If this really was the most expensive TV show ever made at the time, it shows, because the effects are top notch in this show. All the miniature sets, like for cities, mountainscapes, forests, and like the dam that gets destroyed by Garadama is another example. All the sets look great. The city sets are very well detailed and well made. The forests all look great. There is a lot of location shooting on this show as well, but that's all really good too. The dam set, when Garadama destroys it, looks great. The island settings all look great. The monster costumes are all really good, even though there's a lot of Toho stuff. They're well disguised and well built. Even with Pagos, even though it's clearly the Baragon suit repurposed for this show, Pagos is still a cool looking monster, and the suit looks great. Um, the various optical animation effects also look really good. The black and white of this show actually does help to hide the optical animation stuff, like for monsters that have breath weapons. If it's not just a flamethrower in the suit's mouth, those look cool. All the trippy, flashy effects all look really good. When something turns invisible, that looks really good too. Again, the black and white helps hide some flaws in the effects. But yeah, all the suits look great. All the puppet and not stop motion, but puppet and animatronic effects look really good too. Yeah, if this was the most expensive TV show ever produced at the time, it shows, because this show has a very, very good budget and all the effects are top notch. Some of Eiji Tsuburaya's best special effects work. Also, probably his most ambitious too, with this being a show. He just wanted to turn a Toho monster movie or Toho sci-fi film into a show, and he did it pretty damn good. But sadly, those are all the pros that I have for Ultra Q, and I have 8 cons with this show. I told you, we're starting off the series with kind of a whimper, unfortunately. Pro number 1 is, sadly, the characters are pretty bland. I appreciate Kenji Sahara. Well, actually, no. Let me take that back. No, actually, the characters are bland. Their acting is good, especially with Kenji Sahara, because he's been acting in movies for quite a while now. And this just felt like another day at work for him, surely. So he gives a good performance. And same goes for, what's her name? She's also in, what's it called? The original Ultraman as a different character. Yuriko Itogawa as played by Hiroko Sakurai. She gives a good performance too. Really, all the actors give good performances, but their characters are so bland and so boring. Jun is a standard Toho protagonist. He's like his character from the H-Man. He's very simple. He's very monotone. He's very one note. Like, somehow has knowledge and experience in all tricks and trades, and he's boring and bland as fuck. Yuriko, or is that her name? Yeah. Yuriko is the typical female ambitious investigative reporter who puts herself in danger a lot throughout this show and is really snarky and snippy and snotty and wanting to do her job the way that she wants. Kind of like Lois Lane a little bit. So you know how I like characters that put themselves in danger all the time. And Professor Ichinotani, he's just a typical Toho scientist. Somehow has knowledge in all fields of science and is always there to conveniently give Deus Ex Machina explanations for anything that requires a scientist to give his knowledge on. It's very standard, bland, and boring. Sadly, because again, all the characters give good performances, but their characters are just so boring. This leads into con number 2, is that there's no character progression. If you see one episode of this show that has all the main characters in it and you see how they act, that's exactly how they act in every single episode of the series that they're in. It just feels like all these characters stay exactly the same throughout the entire show. It's the same problem that the cast of characters have in the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla show. They all stay exactly the same throughout the whole series, and it can get pretty stale watching these characters do the exact same thing 28 episodes in a row. Con number 3, I think this show has a lack of a through line, and it lacks a progression in and of itself. Knowing that this is a anthology series, I am aware of that. I do know that that tends to kind of be the theme with a lot of anthology shows. They're not supposed to have a through line. They're not supposed to have a series progression. But from the snippets that I've seen, even in the original Twilight Zone show, there seemed to be somewhat of a progression throughout the show. Like it just felt like things just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger throughout the series. But with here, there's no through line and there's no progression. It feels like completely isolated, even though, and this is one thing, the biggest thing that leads me into feeling that the series not having any progression is a problem. It's because there's recurring characters. Also, because they themselves don't progress and change as the series goes on as characters. Because they don't change, the series doesn't change, and it just feels like a whole bunch of isolated incidents that happens throughout the series, and it can feel very jarring, very random, and very confusing, and just kind of hard to engage with because the show is so random and because it doesn't progress as it goes on and it doesn't have a through line. That makes it really hard to get engaged with, in my opinion. Again, it may work for others who are a fan of stuff like The Outer Limits and The Twilight Zone. The thing is, I'm not a fan of those shows, so maybe that's why it doesn't work for me here, because this show is very much like The Twilight Zone. I realize I'm at a disadvantage when it comes to that, but sorry, that just doesn't work for me. Con number 4 is there's a lot of anticlimactic endings in this series. This mostly has to do with anything that has a monster. A lot of the monster episodes, this actually has to do with my 5th con, is the lack of good monster action. So this has to do with a separate problem, but this is how I describe it. Whenever there's a monster in an episode, it's nice that the episodes feel like a Toho monster movie. Like it feels familiar and it feels like it feels pleasantly familiar, like you're just watching more of Toho stuff before the Ultra series finally defined its identity. But the problem is because when the monsters are on screen and when it is vibing pretty strongly as just being a Toho monster movie in black and white as a half-hour long episode, therein lays the problem. Because it's a half-hour long episode, it feels very trimmed down and very truncated. It feels like a 90-minute Toho monster movie slashed down into a half-hour long TV episode. And it doesn't leave enough room for it to fully explore its ideas and really give us a satisfying monster story. Mostly it has to do with the Gomez episode, the Pagos episode, both Paglia episodes, and the Garadamon, or what the hell is it called? I can't quite remember. The Goro episode too. The Gift from Space, that's another one. The Bear and Spider episode and the Garadama episodes. They all feel like Toho monster movies, slashed down to a half hour long. And for me, that's a problem. And it always ends with an extremely anticlimactic ending. This is the setup. 5 minutes to set up where the characters are at and where the problem is. Then have the monster rampage for 15 minutes or so. And then at the last minute, there's some kind of Deus Ex Machina bullshit anticlimactic ending to kill the monster and then just end it at that. It's painful. Probably the absolute worst is the Gift from Space, the Namegon episode where they're just giant snails, which the giant snails look cool, but the episode 3, the Gift from Space, it ends with the characters. This is stupid. The characters don't even kill the monster. It's a giant snail or a giant slug, and it slithers its way off an island and lands in the sea. And it dissolves because seawater, salt. But then the final moment of the episode, another Namegon hatches and starts to attack. Cut to black. That's only episode 3. And that's never mentioned again throughout the entire series. There's not, at least in maybe an episode or two down the line, there could have been a brief instance of dialogue where they mentioned, oh yeah, we just had an airstrike come in and incinerate Namegon. That could have been just fine, but there's not that at all. It feels super abrupt and very anticlimactic. And the Pagos episode is literally, so a uranium atomic power plant reawakens Pagos, and Pagos goes on a rampage. That's cool. That kind of sounds like Godzilla. Alrighty then. Sorry. Anyway, so yeah, that sounds like Godzilla. And Pagos goes on a rampage throughout the cities and goes to destroy the power plant. But then at the last minute, Pagos is destroyed by some kind of anti-uranium missile that's shot into his head. He turns to stone and crumbles to dust. The last 2 minutes of the episode. It's so anticlimactic and it's so abrupt. It's maddening because had these episodes been just a little longer, that's actually why I think this unbalanced, what's it called? Hold on. Let me find this real quick. Horror Theater Unbalance. Each episode apparently is 55 minutes long. That would have been way better for this series if the episode lengths were extended. That's why I actually really want to check out that series. But 25 minutes or so, that's not enough because that's how long each episode is. Oh, they're 24 minutes apiece. Yeah, that's not long enough. If you have a monster episode that's just like a Toho monster movie, having them only be 24 minutes long, that's not really enough time to flush it out to its true potential. Sorry. Pro number 6. There's some shitty looking monsters in this. Actually, no, I'm gonna say there I have 7 cons because I was also gonna say there's some crappy effects, but actually no, I don't think that's true because that could just be wrapped up in there being shitty monsters. There's one episode where the characters fight against a giant mole. Cool concept, but I don't think the suit was really all that well done, in my opinion. It just looks kind of poorly put together, and Eiji Tsuburaya sadly just never really was good at doing mammalian monsters. Insects, aliens, and giant reptiles, cool, but mammalian monsters, no. Because also Goro, the giant monkey, you can give it a facelift as they do in this in here, because that's not the mask for the King Kong versus Godzilla suit. That's a different mask, but it is the same suit. The suit still looks bad, and it still looks like shit. You can give it a new face, but the suit still looks like ass, and that doesn't help. Sorry. Another monster that I think that's pretty shitty is this one here, Peter. Oh, and there's Ragon too. Ragon looks fine. Oh, and also Gara Daemon. I've just never been a big fan of how this thing looks. So there's. Can you tell I have a lot to say about this franchise? Pagos looks cool. Ragon looks cool. Gomez looks cool. Litra sadly doesn't look that good. Paglia looks really good. So it is pretty hit or miss. Mostly it's a hit, but there are some pretty shitty looking monsters in my opinion. So that's sadly, and sadly a lot of the Showa Ultraman series kind of has that problem. It is mostly hits, but there still are quite a few shitty looking monsters. And it all starts with this show, sadly. But the final con that I have for this show, it can get pretty damn boring. There's lots of times where there's lots of episodes where there's barely any monster action. It's all saved for the last 5 or 10 minutes. But because there's no character progression, the characters themselves are bland. There's lots of trippy, metaphysical, experimental, scientific gobbledygook bullshit that's talked about. And because the show likes to take its time for the most part and set up its characters and monsters, it can get pretty slow, boring, and tedious a lot of the time. I remember when I was finishing this show when my son was first born. This probably also had to do with the lack of sleep, but especially toward the end of the series where I was really struggling to get through it. There was lots of times where I was almost falling asleep. And that sucks because this is part of one of my all-time favorite franchises, but to have an installment that's so boring that it almost puts me to sleep, that's pretty damn sad. So, yeah, I'm not a big fan of this series. So, my final thoughts on Ultra Q. This is a hard one for me to recommend. If you are a big fan of stuff like The Outer Limits, The X-Files, and especially if you're a big fan of The Twilight Zone, and you want something that's similar but also a little different, I would probably recommend this to you as well. It's very similar to The Twilight Zone. If you're a fan of that, you'll probably like this show. If you're not a fan of this, I would honestly recommend you give this a pass. If you're an Ultraman fan and you just want to consume all Ultraman media as possible, I suppose you can give this a look as a curiosity piece just to see where the franchise got its start. But unless you're I'm a super diehard Ultraman fan as well. but even I wasn't a big fan of this. So, if you're also a fan of classic show, especially the 60s era, the late 50s and early 60s era of Toho sci-fi and monster movies, I also recommend this as a curiosity piece just to give it a watch, just to see what somebody else could do with that formula while using assets from Toho. It's interesting as a curiosity piece, but if you try to watch it just to watch more kaiju media, I think you'll be a little disappointed. So, this is kind of a hard series to recommend. So, I'll finish off with saying I do recommend it, but I recommend it very lightly. I am a diehard Ultraman fan, so of course I checked this out. But I was pretty disappointed by this by the end of it. And I think for the moment, I'm going to honestly say this is my least favorite installment of the Ultraman series. Well, the Ultra series specifically. But of the entire franchise, of everything that I've seen so far, there's not that many shows that I've disliked. This is probably one of only two or maybe three shows in the Ultra series that I've disliked, but I can honestly say this is probably my least favorite. Not totally a bad thing because we start the series off with such a low bar. The only place that we can go is up. So, join me tomorrow as I tackle a far superior series and is one of my favorite TV shows of all time and one of my favorite installments of the Ultraman franchise. When I review, of course, the original Ultraman from 1966. Post your comments down below and let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. By the way, as far as rating goes, I also do recommend you get your hands on this Blu-ray because they did do a good job of remastering this show to make it look good. But I'm going to give this a 3. Yeah, I was not a big fan of this show. A 3 out of 10. And as always, go out and if you come across a giant slug that shoots lasers from its eyes, or you come across a monster that suspiciously looks very similar to Godzilla, run. And I will see you guys in the next video.